So, hello, Carissa. So nice to having you here. Many thanks for giving your time to us. It really means a lot. So, really welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Uh, yeah, me too. So let's start telling people about your educational background. What did you do on your bachelor's degree, on your master's degree? I always like to start on that to know how you entered in ABA.
Of course. So I came into the ABA very non-traditionally, a lot like you. I have an autistic brother who is 25 now, and he's taking his boards next month. He will be a BCBA.
Wow!
And so he got ABA my whole life, his whole life. So I've been around ABA since I was 3 years old. And it was always a part of life. I was very close to our clinicians. They were like family. I helped run summer camps in high school. And it was something I was always very familiar with. So when I went to go to university, I was like, I'm not going to do ABA because I'm tired of it. I didn't like it
I
anymore.
have done this for my whole
I've done it
life.
my whole life. And also, I saw the problems with it even as a teenager. And I understood its value, but I also was like, I don't want to do this for a living. And so I didn't. I went to undergrad and I got my bachelor's in Middle Eastern Studies and American politics
Wow.
and international politics. And then I got my first master's in American politics. And that's what I wanted to do. I loved politics. I loved the Middle East. I loved the UN. And I was going to do international based politics. And then the pandemic hit and Trump got elected. And a lot of things happened very close together. Trump got
Yeah.
elected and the pandemic hit over those few years. And I realized that though I loved the science of politics, the practice was not the same, right? Very corrupt and emotional and difficult. And so I went and got my RBT so that I could work and figure out what my next steps were. I started working as an RBT and I realized that I didn't like ABA very much. I still don't. But not my favorite thing. But I saw how much effort was being put into changing it, right? And I learned about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do this.
Hmm.
Like, I'm going to go to school and get my BCBA and do all this so that I can do ACT. And so I did. I went back and got a second master's from Arizona State in special education. Sorry, my first, all my degrees before were at Georgia State University in Atlanta, here where I'm from in Georgia. Um, Middle of downtown, very busy, loved it. And then I went to school online, which was crazy for me. I'm so used to being in school. And so graduated, got my hours done, and passed my boards. And now that I'm a BCBA, we're going to do the work. The whole reason I became a BCBA was to change it because I don't like ABA. I didn't like it then. I don't like it now. Um, but I know we're all putting a lot of really hard effort into changing it. And so the whole reason I got into it was to be a part of that effort, right? I didn't just discover it and went, oh, we need to do better. No, I came in from the very start. We have to redo all of this. This all has to go. So I've been certified about a year and trying to make that happen.
Yeah. No, that's completely like, I'm completely surprised. So every time that I watch now the Madam Secretary, the Netflix series, I will remember of you. You could be
That was
there.
gonna be me.
Yeah, definitely. I love all the series on politics and
Yes.
Washington. Like I went in Washington D.C., like beautiful city. Like
Oh, it's beautiful.
yeah,
I love it. It's one of my favorite places. Too expensive, but it's one of my
yeah,
favorite places.
yeah,
Well, and then I was young watching The West Wing, right?
yeah. Uh-huh.
And I kept thinking, this is what it's going to be like. And then I got there and I went, this is not, this isn't what I thought.
This was not on my plans.
No, this was not, everyone's bad and mean and corrupt and not nice. This was
Yeah,
not, no, we're supposed to have vigorous debate and be respectful of one another and respect each other's differences. No,
yeah.
it's not what happened.
Any similarities with the ABA field, just a
Yeah.
coincidence. Just a
All
coincidence.
coincidental. People always laugh at me, my friends, because they're like, you left politics for politics. It's
Yeah,
just a different kind. Instead of nukes, we have extinction, right? Instead of budgets, we have the board, right? But it's all the same.
I see so many similarities when I'm watching this series that I say, oh my God, it is just me that is seeing this. And it's so funny. Oh, now I will have to message you
Yes.
when I am watching this series. So funny. And how old are you?
I'm 27. I turned 27 2
No,
weeks ago.
you don't look like 27. You
I turned
look
27 2 weeks ago, so I'm 27 in 2 weeks.
wow, wow. And you were really close to your brother on like
Yes.
just 2 years apart, maybe less than 2 years
19 months.
apart.
19 months.
Wow. Yeah. So, tell a little bit, since you mentioned your brother, uh tell us a little bit what was your view, your perspective for all his life of services. Like, it has things that your mother did not agree with, and she, like, before we started recording, I was telling you things that I did not agree with, that I really suffered a lot with like ABA services. You guys went through something like that with your brother?
It was the 90s.
Yeah.
So Christian was diagnosed in 98 here in Atlanta at the Marcus Autism Center, which was one of
Mm-hmm.
the few places doing autism diagnoses at the time. He was diagnosed at 21 months. And it's interesting because my mother is also in the field.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
She's also
really?
going to be certified soon. Yes. But
Wow.
she had been in psychology and mental health. Here in the United States, we had state-run mental institutions. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, they started deinstitutionalizing everything. So now all of our mental health is run privately by companies. So when she was in her early 20s, my mom, she was part of that process, taking men out of group homes, out of state institutions, rehabbing and putting them in apartments and living on their own in her early 20s. So my mother has always been in mental health. So when my brother got diagnosed, my mom was already on it. But this was the late 90s, early 2000s. So ABA wasn't what it is
Emerging.
now.
Yes, yes.
And so he got ABA a little later on, but we started in speech, OT, sensory integration therapy, feeding therapy, right? Everything off the bat. So my experience as a sibling, which is something I feel very passionately about, sibling inclusion, sibling education, because as you've seen, it affects the sibling just as much. It's different, but it's there and present. And siblings are stakeholders. They deal with the person, they contribute to and hurt or help the person, they have consequences from the therapy, and they can be a huge asset to the treatment team, which is something I feel very strongly about. So I was older, and I realized, I mean, I don't know when, not at 2 and 3, but by 6, 7, 8, what was going on. And he was nonverbal for quite a long time. And I was his voice at school and anywhere my mom wasn't. And we just fought constantly, fought the school board, fought therapists. We're
IPs
lucky.
meetings.
Meetings. Now, I wasn't at 6 and 7 years old, but I was a part, like I was watching him. And, he is a miracle. He's amazing. He has a master's degree. He's about to be a BCBA. But when I'm growing up, I'm seeing just constant therapy. They're at the table, they're working. On one hand, he gets all the cool stuff. He gets treasure box. He gets I don't get anything, which, as an adult seems silly. But when you're a kid, it really starts to mess with you. But then on the other hand, I saw when the therapy would fail because I was with him probably the most, especially as we were teenagers and young adults. And I live with him. I've lived with him for almost 5 years when he was finishing college. And so my perspective, especially with ABA, once we got to that point where he was in ABA and I was old enough to see, was I saw its value. You can't not see its value when you're doing it, but you also see the repetitiveness, the ridiculousness of tasks. Why does my 14-year-old need to know how to touch his nose? Right? You see that the assessments are either too young or too advanced, right? Like, no, he can't drive a car, but also he can touch his nose, right? There's this gap between 9 and 15 where kids just don't have any resources and ABA doesn't know what to do. And we had a really good BCBA, which we were all very close to, which is important. But you see the gaps as they start getting older, when they're driving, when they're shopping, when they're cooking for themselves, when they're living on their own. And I think that's where it started coming to play for me, because he would call me and not know what to do about something that seems really obvious, but it was never targeted. Oops, we missed that target in the self-help program. Oops. So there would be these
life
gaps.
Skills.
Yes, these gaps. My favorite story to tell, we have something here called meatloaf, where you just take meat and tomatoes and seasoning and you squish it all together and then you put it in the pan. So I always put an egg in my meatloaf to keep it bound together, right? So it sticks together. He cooked meatloaf one night and the recipe said egg, and there was a sunny side egg on top, right? Because no one taught him the purpose, the function of the egg and the meatloaf is to keep the meatloaf together, right? And to him, he didn't. So there's these little gaps. And then you start seeing whatever you ask how he is, he always says good. Because that's what they taught him to say, right? And little rote responding and things like that. Not now, but in his teenage years. And so I was just like, we have to do better for our older clients, for our transitional age clients, right? We have to stop treating everyone like they're on the VB map, because they're not. And we have to do better because we're not creating functional adults. We're creating ABA robots. And I just see it. I still see it every day, the little things, right? And we're not adapting. We were not, at that time especially, we're not adapting. And now, as a young man, he's still having to deal with neurodivergence, what that means, what it means to him. And these are all conversations that, had we talked about it or had it been a part of treatment, things would be better. Now, none of us could have predicted the neurodiversity movement, right? 10 years ago, none of us could have said this would be what it is. But now that it is, we have a responsibility to teach our families about it and our kids, and, connect them to their own community, right? And not just make them normal, because they're never going to not be autistic. They're autistic for the rest of their life. We have to make them functional so they can survive, but not making them normal, which there's no such thing. It doesn't exist anyway, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. We don't see, what I see is that we don't see people prepared to deal with teenagers and adults. And here we still have, like here in Brazil, for example, we still have the view that it's ABA is for children. But it's because we are not seeing enough people practicing the science in the life. So it's in your life, in behaviors in general. We still have the view of many professionals wanting to work only with kids. We still have the view of professionals saying, oh, nobody will notice that he's autistic, because he will, with the time and the training, we will move beyond stereotype behaviors. We won't have stereotypes anymore. um it was so funny because on Sunday I did a post on eye contact, and it was huge. And it was so interesting to see, but at the same time really sad, because I saw neurodivergent people saying, oh, thank God someone said that we should not target eye contact as a goal anymore, because this really upsets me, makes me feel bad, and things like that. And at the other side, we have professionals. Oh, how can you say that? We need to, how can you go against research that it's eye contact, it is important to communication, to learning, and they don't get that we can have someone that is not looking at you, but it's listening
Still
everything that,
listening and
yeah, and
understanding.
understanding, yes. And then we have a third group of people that they're mothers, and I believe that most of them are mothers of young children, because I get them. I was this mom once, that we are just thinking, oh, I really want my son to be normal. Like they say this,
Yes.
we know that they don't say with a bad intention. They are scared from the future. If
They're
they are,
scared.
they, yeah,
The disconnect between practitioners and parents on both sides, having been a person who raised a child with autism, is still raising a person with autism, it gets so frustrating to me when I see autistic advocates online, autistic adults and parents fighting.
yeah.
Because here's the thing. The autistic advocates adults, 90+% of them are not parents,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are allowed to have their trauma. They're allowed to be upset. They are allowed to advocate for their views, but they do not understand what it is like to have a child whose safety is not guaranteed, whose success is not guaranteed. And that the lack of compassion between these two groups is a very big problem. Take ABA out of it at all, right? Now, I believe ABA has an important role in bridging that gap, but we lose a lot of compassion for parents because we're so caught in what we think is the right thing to do, right? We understand what the textbook says, we understand what the literature says, but parents have to do it every day. And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't work, if they don't get better, that's on the parents forever, for the rest of their lives. And being judgmental about that, I've never understood it, but probably because I have an autism parent, right?
Yep.
But it's and I know you've probably seen me post in my content. Stop trash talking parents on social
Mm-hmm.
media. Stop talk. What are you doing? It's unprofessional, one,
Yeah.
and unethical, but it's also unkind. A bunch of 23-year-old girls on the internet talking trash when they have no idea what they're talking about. Even BCBAs who have children, but they're neurotypical children. You know, it's disheartening to see. And that group, looking at a group of mothers and saying, you're an ableist because you want your kid to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they want their kid to be normal. So they're safe for the rest of time, so that when they die, they know that their child will live, right? And ignoring that for the sake of anything, I think is silly. I think what we need to do is expand what parents believe is normal and is safe. Instead of telling them they're wrong, say, let me educate you on this, on how your child can live and be successful and be themselves. And that's where we're failing. We're buying into the narrative, and we're feeding those parental thoughts of getting better, going better. So of course they feel that way. And I don't think it's ableist of them to feel that way. I think it's normal for parents to feel that way. I think it's ableist of us not to educate them and engage with them fairly and to be judgmental. because you don't know what it is to go to sleep with a nonverbal autistic child and not know if you could die tomorrow, if they would be safe. And I do, and you do. And until you do,
Yeah.
you don't really get a say.
Yeah, totally. Like it is like a huge fight right now on social media, parents versus adults, autistic adults. And each one needs to stop and hear each other. And I think that you need to be open, because we have professionals and parents, of course, that they are not open to listen. So that's on this post on eye contact, what I said was that if you're here open to listen what I have to say, we can debate. But if you are here just to criticize and say bad things, you are not open to anything that I say to you. I can give you many research and science and everything. You don't want to hear. And that's other thing that I really want to hear your thoughts on. We we the whole neurodiversity movement is telling us that we need to have more researchers that are neurodiverse. People writing research papers, training others. And in the other side, we have people who are saying, when every time a neurodivergent brings something like eye contact, for example, please don't teach me eye contact because this really hurts me. The other part wants to say, you are going against science. So you are listening someone telling you, and do you prefer to listen to someone, some neurodivergent individual, than instead of hearing the science? So that's what they put us through. Yes, and that's what I really wanted to hear, because that's the place that I am being put off.
So they're creating a false duality where it's science or people, right? And one, it's fundamentally false. Science, what even is science? Ask any BCBA to operationally define science, and they're not going to be able to. Science is a living and breathing thing. Okay. And ABA is an applied science, which means you take scientific principles that are created, developed, and maintained, and you apply it. And that application process changes everything. So when I hear a lived experience from a neurodivergent person, I prioritize that based on my own ethics and my own experience much higher than the science. What I think a lot of people don't understand, and this comes from generations of bad education, right? It's not any particular person's fault. What is evidence? Right? We have this whole 45, 50 years of ABA literature, whatever that means, bunch of white dudes, most of them, with a bunch of white kids in middle America who all are not food scarce, who don't have trauma, a bunch of white kids in Pennsylvania, right? They do a 2-week study, they publish it, and now we're all using token economies. And which is just so ridiculous. I very controversially am of the opinion that 90+% of all ABA literature is nonsense, that what we constitute as evidence is nonsense, that we've decided something is evidence-based, and then we do it when there's no long-term studies, there's no longitudinal studies. It's 3 or 4 weeks on average of treatment. They write up the results, make a graph, and publish it. What happens on week 8? What happens 5 years from then when the kid's 11 or 13? We don't have those answers because ABA structurally has been set up where the science It's bad science. Ask any chemist, any biologist, any physicist, any truly psychological scientist, psychometrists, ask them what they think about ABA literature. They're going to roll their eyes at you.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, ugh, the behaviorists. Ugh. And we've earned that. And instead of being critical about what our evidence is, where it comes from, the biases present in the publication of our evidence, the biases present in who gets chosen, 90+% of subjects in ABA research are white. And I'm supposed to take that research to you in Brazil.
Yeah.
With the poverty and the environmental factors. I'm supposed to say 6 little white boys in Pennsylvania who live in 8-bedroom houses liked this. Go apply it in Brasilia, where the average household income is $42 a year. Like, how does that make any sense? It's bad science. And so then we use this opinion of science. It's not science as rhetoric, science as a word that gives someone power. Science is better than people. Science means something as a word, not even what it is. And we use it to discredit people's experiences. And we use it to discredit people's opinions. And we use it to discredit people's dissent, right? Their fight. And it's ridiculous. And it's unethical. But that has a huge history of happening, not just in ABA, in any psychological field, in any medical field. Okay, medicine, good Lord, right? In all the sciences, except the ones that don't hurt anybody, right? Where people are a part of the application, the people who are doing the science too are always fighting back. And science is having this rhetorical power of being a bully against what they're saying. And I think that's nonsense. I think it's really full of crap because it's bad science, and anyone who takes any time to really dig into it can see that. And there is value to every study, but not the value we give to it. For a field that preaches about overgeneralization, we overgeneralize everything. One study, there is more evidence for essential oils than there is for social stories. Yet they're an evidence-based practice, right? And we're so dismissive and aggressively dismissive of every other form of anything, especially when it comes to autism. Now, I'm not going to tell you essential oils will cure autism. I will tell you that the scent factors in the brain can promote calming and anti-anxiety because they can. So will a diffuser with lavender oil cure you? No. Will it de-escalate a tantrum? Yes. Why can't we do both? They're like, no. What do they say? It's dubious. You know that word in Portuguese? Dubious treatments.
Yeah.
You're like, you're so disrespectful. And then they put things like physically abusing your child, right? And art therapy in the same category. And you're like, these are two different things. So not ABA just came about and came out of, if you look at the history of the science, right? Men, 1, white men, 2, white straight men, as far as we know. As you're aware. And science at the time, psychology at the time, was going through a lot. Freud was dead, right? Thank God. And they didn't know what to do. Psychoanalysis was falling short. Universities were starting to want more structure to psychological understanding and education. And I think that history piece is so important for ABA practitioners to understand because it shows you what happened. Skinner loved rats, like me. I love rats. Loved birds. He liked spraying things with water and seeing what happened. He didn't even know what autism was. Skinner didn't treat autism a day in his life. He didn't found ABA. His students looked at his work and said, I think we can apply this to people. And they left him and went to a different university and founded JABA. Bayer, Wolf, and Risley did, right? And so the way we use science today on social media against neurodivergent practitioners and clients against people who will talk bad about ABA, and to ourselves, to our own students, is as a bully, as a weapon to say, no, you're wrong. And that's not the nature of science. The nature of science is to be inclusive, is to find the truth, is to understand. And we are directly, most of the field is directly in contradiction of that. And we don't want to look at the systemic factors that influence that. Why don't we have autistic practitioners? Why don't we have autistic PhDs who are doing research for themselves? Because the PhD process is horrific and abusive, and autistic people on average cannot do it because they've been abused their whole lives anyway. And you get them in their late 20s, why would they sign up for $100,000 more abuse, which is what the PhD process can be? So we don't want to look at the problem, the systemic problem, which is the reason the science, as bad as it is, doesn't reflect what we're hearing, is because those people are deliberately kept out of the science on purpose through a variety of factors, both literally on purpose by some people and by financial and emotional and socioeconomic factors in their lives. So it's bad logic. It's bad science. It's bad ethics. And we continue to dig ourselves deeper in this hole where someone looks at your face. I've been on a Zoom call with a group of neurodivergent practitioners and some BCBAs, if we can call them that. And they literally were like, this happened to me. And they're like, I don't see that reflected in Java. Like literally to their faces, fighting them on what they've been through, telling them that what they've been through is wrong, right? That the things that they do are wrong. And so until we drop the attitude, right, and the defensiveness and the culture ABA has of fighting first and listening second, I mean, it's not going to get better. And we deserve all the criticism we're getting.
Do you think that ABA is, I usually say that here, it at least here in Brazil, but do you think in the United States, it is a field really hierarchical? Oh, this is a tough
Hierarchical.
Yes.
Hierarchical. Yes, that's a word.
This is a difficult one for us.
Yes.
Do you see that it is? Because here I see like clearly.
Well, there's two different hierarchies, but yes, absolutely. So on the academic side,
Okay.
right? Because 90% of people who practice ABA in America don't even know what's happening over here. They don't know who's at the universities. They don't know who's publishing. They're not reading articles. They're working 60-hour weeks, right? With caseloads of 20. They're not sitting at home reading through the journals. So I would say there's two hierarchies. There's the academic hierarchy, where the field is 13% men, 13% men, and 70+% of them are in PhD and professor jobs. So it's this much of the field, and they're in this much of the power, you know, like in everything. So you have the board and the actual humans on the board, not just the board as a concept. And you have department heads, you have the heads of programs, you have ABAI, who credentials the programs. You have all those people who make the decisions, right? The people at universities, the people publishing. Then you have all the PhD and PhD candidates who are working themselves to death, right? And are trying and are doing research and are doing the work, right? But that are getting crushed by this system that they're in. And then over here, you have insurance companies, right? And private equity companies and money, the funders. Then you have clinical directors who aren't BCBAs and clinical directors who are. And then you have BCBAs. And then at the bottom, you have RBTs who get, well, and then you have clients, probably at the very bottom. So if we take clients out of it, if we take consumers completely out of it, RBTs are being horrifically abused in this system. They're overworked, underpaid, undertrained, undersupported. and exploited. And so it's very hierarchical in the way that power just kind of flows down, and that makes for a lot of very complicated relationships with your staff, with families, with your clinical directors. And if you're in the university academic, it's even worse. You want to write a paper, but one of your department chairs is anti so-and-so, so you can't write that paper, right? Or you're going to get kicked out of school, or you're going to lose your funding. So it's very hierarchical. But I think what's different a little bit here is that whoever's at the top is with the money. So here, who's at the top is the insurance companies. They dictate most of what we can and can't do, which is ridiculous. The least qualified people, and the people who have the least amount of training, and the people who understand ABA probably weren't the least out of any of them, make the most of our clinical decisions here.
It's those sentence on follow the money that it's we usually see, like, follow the money and then you will get it. Who is in charge?
And I'm sure in Brazil, you don't have mass mandated insurance and ABA. So the people getting ABA in Brazil have money.
Yeah, because you have insurance paying for ABA, but what the insurance they what they do is that they want to pay spending the less amount of money. So they usually will pay the ones who has the less expensive price. And in many cases, this will not be the best service because it will be the ones who have many cases.
Yes.
And then you will have like professionals with different backgrounds. Like here, you will have someone like for ABA therapy, you usually will have someone from the field of health or education. But the problem is what kind of post-graduation this professional has done. And then we go on the training problem. Who is training on these post-graduations? So, for example, in my company, I bring lots of BCBAs who live in the United States to teach the classes because I know that they have the expertise in this area that I am looking for. But not many people will do that, and not many people want you to have the right training, because then you will need me for supervision. And then I will make money with you because you will have to pay me supervision for your whole life. So for me, it's not a good business for you to be independent and and don't need me anymore. And you will run your practice independent. So that's what we do for our students who come to us, because they are psychologists, SLPs, professors from education, and they want to learn about the science. And then what I say is that, okay, here it is the content, and we have live supervision on discussion of cases twice a month. And then we are there for them for 30 months. So they can do the post-graduation in no less than 12 months and no more than 30 months. And then we give them all the support they need. But people, like, we will have like in the United States, we have like hundreds of masters in ABA. So like here, we have hundreds of post-graduations. And some people will choose by what they are able to pay, and other are choose the quicker ones and things like that. But here the education costs much less than the United States. So higher education here, it's much more cheaper than higher education in the United States. So we have this advantage because, like, higher education in the United States is like crazy, the amount of money that you spend. So we have these differences, and this will affect the kind of service that people will receive. So that's like a huge thing. And the insurance, like, they don't care. They just want to pay the less amount of money that, and that they get it, and that's okay. And usually what happens is that parents, they are not satisfied with the kind of service that is being provided, and then they seek for help, for justice, trying to remove this professional from the case, and bringing another one, because we still have this, like, you go to court and you fight to the insurance to pay, and then the court says that, for example, your clinic is responsible and they will pay only for you, and like, I cannot choose. And then you are not providing me a good service, and I say, oh, I don't want your clinic anymore, I want to change, I want to go to another one. And then you need to go to justice again, just to ask, oh, please, I don't want. And then you need to prove why you are not satisfied, so you need to make evidence on this. So in some cases this happens, and then parents has their all this trouble. In other cases is more simple, but like in 90% of cases they want to be paid by insurance, so insurance will cover the treatment, like in the US. But the thing is that here the insurance, they are not so sophisticated yet on organizing like the codes that you will bill, what will be what could be built or not, things like that. So this is why we are not so advanced yet, and on this point it has good and bad things on this. But usually, like, the services, they are still pretty like old school, so pretty not having like more just DTT. We still have people who thinks that ABA, it is a method, not a science. All those kinds of discussions on DTT, just do DTT and 10 times motor imitation and matching to sample, and not giving opportunity to communicate. Like, we are still on this phase yet.
Don't think there's practitioners here and that's still all they do. So, and that's a problem with the dissemination part, right? Where there's this gap between the research. Now, the research is not where it should be. It's not perfect by any means, but there are amazing researchers out there really trying to push what's being published. But even with the research, there's this gap between the research and the education, what we're teaching in our master's programs, and then what we do on the ground. So, in most master's programs, you learn 3 assessments: the VB-MAP, the AFLs, maybe, the ABLs, maybe, right? And these are not evidence-based ABA assessments. These are just, right? And it's all so connected. Insurance requires a certain assessment. You have to use that assessment. So then your goals all look like that assessment. The VB-MAP's a common example, where now we're targeting matching to sample and we're targeting object imitation because that's what the VB-MAP tells us to target. And we have to use the VB-MAP because insurance tells us we have to, right? And then it's the only one I learned to use in school. So it's the only one I know how to do. So it's the only one I'm going to do. And so everything just gets narrower. It just gets smaller. It's all you're taught. I think our master's programs aren't robust enough. They aren't big enough. They're too fast. They go over everything too fast. And they don't spend enough time on the details. And so you have practitioners who pass their exam or who are doing the work, who don't know how to do anything but a VB-MAP, right? And then you give them a 14-year-old What are they going to do? They're going to do the VB map on that 14-year-old, and it's incredibly inappropriate and a waste of their time, but they don't know what else to do. So it's just creating incompetence, right? It's building incompetence into the system from the start. And the amount of work it takes, the average BCBA, the amount of money it takes to pay for CEUs, to pay to learn new assessments, to pay for the assessments is a huge barrier to change. They're exhausted. They work full time. They're going to go home and ignore their kids and do a 4-hour CEU on a new assessment? No, they're not. Why? Right? We're not setting anyone up for success. We're setting everyone up to be as mediocre as possible and to just get it done.
Yeah.
The whole system is.
And making someone to do a test like the board exams is not a guarantee that you have a good therapist. Being a good test taker is not being a good professional. So you could prepare for the test and then you could almost, I don't know, memorize all those kinds of things and know all the language and know how to do the test, like take the test, and not being a good therapist. That's usually what I say. Okay, just because you pass it on an exam, this does not make you better than I am, because we need so much more than just a credential. Like we need more for being a therapist, or a profession in the field.
And so many of the skills you need, and not just the soft skills, right? How to talk to people, right? How to negotiate, how to deliver hard news kindly, right? Those are soft skills, they call them, right? But parent training isn't on the exam. Billing and insurance isn't on the exam. Staff training isn't really on the exam, right? They teach us to do BST, they teach us to do self-management. But what does that look like when you have RBTs? How a supervision session goes, how to supervise, how to make program modifications, all the things I do every day. I didn't learn any of them at school. None of them. I tell people all the time, the exam is it's like, if you can pass a biology exam, doesn't mean you can do surgery. Doesn't mean you can talk to people and be a doctor and be kind and compassionate. They're just such different skills. And the exam is important because you need to understand that they know the information, but it's not the full picture. And supervision, right, our field work is supposed to be in that role, but we all know it's not functioning that way. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing because of so many of those financial things. People are making way too much money. And there's been a lot of inaction on the ethical problems we're all having with supervision and supervising fieldwork. And so both sides aren't really working the way they're supposed to, which is creating thousands and thousands of BCBAs who go to work and have no idea what to do. Right? And that's going to be our downfall, right? We have so many. Imagine if they were just graduating 20,000 doctors who couldn't be a doctor and people started dying. Thankfully, it's not that, I mean, it can be, but thankfully, most of the time it doesn't end that way. But we're doing real damage, the field, real damage to real children and real families that will last forever because we're going as fast and as cheap as humanly possible. And we're growing way bigger than we can manage. And everyone's just making too much damn money to care.
Yeah, of course. And talking about supervision, how was your experience with supervision when you were doing your hours for the BCBA? And what do you think are the problems that are happening in the United States with supervision that you talk to people? Because here that's why it is not a system that we can really apply here, because our our RBTs here, they would be people who already have a degree. So
Yes.
we would not have like an 18 years old who just was in high school. No, here you would have like a psychologist, an SLP, OT, someone with a bachelor's degree being an RBT. And no one goes to college and like you don't go to the university and do a whole bachelor's degree, and now you won't be a speech language pathologist anymore, and you will be an RBT, and we want to be supervised for someone else. So we have those kinds of issues here that are pretty different to apply supervision. What I say that would be more suitable would be like do some consultation, mentorship, bring your cases that you feel that you are not so comfortable about, seek for someone to help you organize your practice with you, and seek these people every time you need it, and pay like hourly, not on, I don't know, monthly or every time you need it. Of course, this will be paid. So we have many problems that I don't have. Of course, I don't have all the answers how to organize this practice. I know the problems. I have some clues, but I would like to hear your thoughts on starting on how was your experience when you were doing your hours.
Mm-hmm. It's really complicated because when I was doing my hours, I was an RBT. So I was working. Or in the
you
pandemic.
were not paying. You were not paying for those hours because the agency was.
No. So my first half of my hours, I paid my employer.
Okay.
Which I think is an incredibly questionable practice and incredibly unethical and exploitative. And I think the board should step in and make that not a thing, because I think it's very wrong. Because what happens is it's a dual relationship. I am a BCBA candidate pursuing supervision to learn to be a BCBA from this BCBA. I'm also an employee on these cases of that BCBA, which creates a multiple relationship. If I was having ethical problems at the first company I received supervision, but I didn't report those problems to the board or to anyone because I was afraid of losing my hours that I had paid for. So you're creating situations in which RBTs are being exploited, right? They're being told you can't quit or I won't sign your form. You have to do more hours or I'm not going to give you your hours, right? Something they have to have is being loitered over them constantly. And I see it all the time. So that's one of the biggest problems I have with supervision in the United States is that most of us get supervised by our employer, which is a de facto multiple relationship. And there's no way to protect you as a student when you're also working for that person, right?
And the employer is the one is the clinical director of the agents or the clinic, because we can have someone as a clinical director that it's not your BCBA on the cases. Like he or she can be a BCBA, but maybe the job that he's doing is being like an administrator, something like running the clinic, but not supervising cases. And then you have another BCBA who was hired to be a supervisor.
And some work that way. Some there's scaffolding, right? Some when they're big enough. But when they're too big in the United States, you have your own problems, right? Too many kids, not enough supervision, too many staff, not enough hours. It just doesn't end. And so I left that company, my first company. I got my hours. My second company, which I still work for now, is a BCBA. I love. And we had an incredible relationship. Students got their hours, of course, for free, no money. And I was given extra unrestricted tasks and extra things to do. But I still had a lot of unrestricted left. So I went and paid, personally, I chose to pay for extra unrestricted hours only the last 3 or 4 months before I took my exam. Which I didn't regret. I wanted to be done. And so I made that choice. But it's expensive. It's incredibly expensive. And so I think a system in which most of these people are RBTs, right, who are getting their BCBA, we know what they make. And then they're being asked to pay for supervision. I don't have all the answers either, because no matter what, it's going to change the way we're doing things significantly. My biggest idea is that it has to go back to, there are certified supervision sites around the country. You can apply to the board, hopefully, not ABAI, but you can apply to be a supervision site for the board that's regulated. They're audited. Their supervision practices are audited. And there's a handful around the country. So when you're going to be a BCBA, you know that you have to move. You know that you have to go there.
To these specific places.
Specific places. Like there's teaching hospitals. When you're going to be a doctor, you get through med school and then
like
you do your
Grey's Anatomy.
Yes, exactly. Seattle Grace is a teaching hospital.
Yeah.
But they have people they answer to for their curriculum, right? So it has to be more like that. It has to be free. They have to be paid. So they have to be funded by someone else. There's too many people giving too much supervision, and most of it is bad. Because we said, if you're a BCBA and you take this 1 8-hour course, you can be a supervisor. So we have BCBAs who are signing forms for supervision that never happened, signing forms for bad supervision. Now, we have amazing supervisors who do amazing work and who are working very hard and are great. They should go work at these supervision sites, right? Not every BCBA is meant to be a supervisor. That's the other thing. Just like not every doctor is meant to be a teacher, right? Yeah. So we have BCBAs that have no business being supervisors. They're not good teachers. They're not patient. They're not instructors. That's fine. Not everybody is. Yet they're in charge of someone's entire life, their entire future, their education. So we've put the power in the hands of everybody, and we need to take it back. And what that means is that we're going to have a lot less BCBAs, because instead of thousands and thousands and thousands going to thousands of schools and then going to thousands of clinics, it's going to be much smaller. And so, which I think is a good thing, because I'd much rather have a smaller group of people who know what they're doing than a huge group of people who have no idea what they're doing. But a lot of other people in power very much disagree with that. So it's complicated, because the education, the master's degree, whatever it is, needs to be in partnership with the supervision so that they know how to balance each other. I know for a fact you learned this in school, so I'm going to do this, which you didn't learn in school. They need to be a team. And right now they're completely separate. And so the schools don't know what they're teaching, don't know what the kids need, the students, kids, right? The supervisors don't know what they're learning and just are dealing with the kid right in front of them. And there's too many other things going on. When you're running a clinic, right, you have patients, you have parents, you have fires. Your priority is not going to be the education of your staff. It's just not. And so we need places where that's the point, where there are people whose job it is to take care of the kids, and then people whose job it is to teach the students, both at the same time. And we don't have that. We just have everybody teaching everybody. And then, as you've seen, what happens is you have one bad supervisor, 10 bad students who create 100 bad students who create 1,000 bad students. And it's just because they don't know any better, because they've just been taught poorly. And it's just growing exponentially. You know, I had to seek out and pay for thousands of dollars worth of supervision to feel comfortable starting my job, not even doing my job. And I'm grateful to have a boss who's an amazing mentor, been a BCBA almost 20 years. But 53% of BCBAs have been certified less than 5 years. Half. None of us know what we're doing. We're all a bunch of babies running around. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands more every few months, because the process has been made so unstructured that they're just shooting through. I finished my master's, my field work, and took my exam in 16 months.
Wow.
And that's crazy.
Yeah.
And now I have 20 years, right, of personal experience, but it's just, which is one of the reasons I got through it so quickly. But every part of the process is not going well. We're not educating them enough. The supervision field work on average is bad. They're taking the exam, which isn't difficult enough and isn't even covering the skills that they need. Took the exam, pass it, and now they're doing the job in a system that's built to exploit them. New BCBAs, our burnout rate is ridiculous. Our quitting before 5 years rate is over 40%. Because then they're like, great, look how much money you can make me. Here's 30 clients. Bye. And so every part of this is not going well, right? And I think the worst part is the supervision piece because it's so exploitative, because it's costing thousands of dollars. I have a dear friend who paid almost $9,000. And now the board is saying most of those hours she can't even use. There's no getting that money back.
No.
$10,000. And so people are just being exploited by everything. And so it's sad. It's one of the most heartbreaking things. And so being a good supervisor is something I feel very strongly about, but it's a difficult job. It takes a lot. And not every BCBA is meant to do it, yet every BCBA is doing it because it's just what's expected, right?
And why do you think that people go to do supervision? Because it is like you earn more money, and then you don't have to be like in the field, like directly with a client, so it's more comfortable. I won't say that it's easy, because when you take it seriously, it's a lot of responsibility. Yes, but going with the fact that many of them doesn't take this so seriously, with the responsibility that it is needed. Why so many people want to be a supervisor?
Not everyone is meant to be a teacher. I could not teach high schoolers. I find children and teenagers disrespectful. I will fight some kid. I can't teach high schoolers. I'm not meant to do that. I'm really good with college students. I've been teaching college students since I was 19 years old, because I did it all in my undergrad and first master's, because I can relate to them and because they're adults. I can say things like, move your ass, and not get fired, because they're adults. We're all adults, right? And that's why I do well with supervision. Not everyone is meant to do every job. Not every person is meant to work with small children. And not every BCBA is meant to work with teenagers. That's one of my specialties, but it's incredibly difficult. And so everyone has a purpose. But when the system is set up to make you do something that isn't your purpose, you're going to do it poorly. And so the system needs to be set up to those who want to teach can and do successfully, and those who don't have to, right? So when you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, you go work at a teaching hospital. And if you're not a teacher, you don't go work at a teaching hospital, and everything's fine. We're going to have to really systematically move our system to look more like that in order for us to control for the quality and the fidelity of the education that they're getting. Having them sign a monthly form. Do you know how easy it is? Someone can fake their entire fieldwork experience. I've seen it.
They just need to
they just need a BCBA willing to sign the form. You don't think out of the 57,000 BCBAs, there's not 10, 100 who don't care or will do it for the money? I've seen it. Where literally you can make up a tracker, you can make up meeting records, I've seen people do it in a matter of weeks, years, just made all 2,000 hours up. There's no way for the board to check. Because they can't ask for HIPAA protected information. They can't ask about clients. They can't talk to anybody else. It's against the law here in America. So
Privacy
there's no way
taken really serious in the United States.
Yes. So there has to be a way we can control it that doesn't break the law. And the only way to do that is to have a stronger accreditation process for supervision sites. And the only way to do that is to make fewer of them. And that, I understand why that's unpopular. I would not have been able to do it that way because I couldn't move and I was working. So it's going to really limit who can become a BCBA, which is its own problem, right? It's going to be harder for people of color. It's going to be harder for minorities and women. It's going to be harder for people with children. And those are the people we need. But certain certifying thousands of people who have no idea what they're doing and are harming the field is not worth it.
It's
We
not
have to,
solving the problem
it's not
either.
solving that problem either.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a way to do this that also systemically we can try to make up some of that diversity problem. But we have to do better. And internationally, what are we going to do? The board, a bunch of people in Colorado, can't tell you what to do in Brazil or what to do in Egypt or in China, because your culture, your language, your education systems, the way you view autism, your psychiatric systems, your diagnosis process are all completely different.
Yeah.
So we need the board, if they're going to be there and do what they're supposed to be doing, to have a way to sponsor boards in other countries and create certification boards or licensing boards or however it works legally in those countries, but not be in control of them, not be the boss, just help,
Say
spread
hi.
awareness.
Sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I like your t-shirt.
Yeah, he loves dinosaurs.
I love dinosaurs too.
This is Benicio.
Hi,
And this
Benicio.
is Carissa. He's shy. He came to give mom a hug.
I understand.
And so tell us about your job. What do you do in your daily basis? So you mentioned that you work for a company. Tell us what do you do as part of your practice as a BCBA?
So I work for a very small company here in Atlanta. That's the way I like it. We have 12 staff and 13 kids, and I do exclusively in home and at school. We don't have a clinic. Clinic ABA here functions very much like daycare.
Mm-hmm.
You drop your kid off, you pick your kid up. I don't love that model of ABA. I don't find it generalizes very well. And I don't do well being stuck in one place all day. You see me all the time in the car, driving and listening to music. So my day looks like I have supervision sessions. I see all of my kids at least once a week, sometimes twice. I see all of my staff at least once a week. And so at the beginning of the week, I look at my full week, I make my schedule, my plan for the whole week, and then I go. So I have usually between sometimes 2, sometimes 3, depending on the day, supervision sessions a day, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. For my teenagers, maybe 1 in the evening because they have later hours because they're in school. And then I do supervision. So I'm in the session, I'm doing parent training, I'm supervising and changing programs, I'm giving direction to the RBT. I spend a lot of time with my clients. I don't like to feel like I'm the principal, coming in with my laptop and no, I try to see my kids often enough where they're used to me. I don't like the idea of them not being used to me or knowing who I am. And then when it's report writing time, every 6 months, I'm writing reports and doing assessments and gathering the data and writing those. Staff meetings once a month. It's very calm. I love my job because I'm able to just do my job, right? Sometimes there's an emergency, of course, or something happened, but most of the time I just get to spend time with my kids, spend time with my staff, and try to do good ABA.
Yeah. And you were telling about assessments and you work with teenagers, and we were talking about all the problems with assessments for teenagers who already has a set of skills but they lack life skills, like the example you told about your brother and the egg. So how do you what tip would you give to about assessing teenagers? What do you do in your practice?
It's difficult. It's probably the hardest part because there's assessments you have to do, right? We have to do because insurance makes us. Even if they aren't relevant, it doesn't matter. So what I like to do is the assessment for me is just such a tiny piece It's a piece I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it informs where we're at. It gives a good baseline, but it's not what I program from. I don't take targets from assessments. I don't. My teenagers will usually do the Vineland. Do you have the Vineland 3
Mm-hmm.
behavioral
Mm-hmm.
scales? So
Mm-hmm.
we'll do the Vineland. I do the Vineland on all my kids, and some of it's so silly, right? Like, can they sit in a chair, right? Some of it's really silly, but I do it for everyone. It's a nice baseline thing. Um, and then we'll do peak, or we'll do the AFLs, or we'll do the ables sometimes if they're in that middle range. Um, Mostly I'll do the AFLs because that's what they like, insurance likes. But I never really program off the AFLs. There are things on the AFLs I still can't do. Like every time I go through it, I'm like, oh, I can't do that. I don't know if I could do that either. Um, so like tie a tie, I can't tie a tie, or change the oil in my car. I certainly can't do that. Um, and then I think the key for teenagers is meeting them where they're at, not expecting them to be anywhere other than where they are, and pairing. Okay, a little kid, if you bring enough toys, they're gonna love you by the end of it. But teenagers don't trust you. They've been
You need
hurt,
to
they've
earn
been
the
judged.
trust.
You have to earn it. And so pairing isn't just 2 sessions of pairing, then targets. No, it's weeks, it's months, it's an ongoing process. You have to talk to them like they're people. You have to engage in conversation. You have to be interesting, right? You can't infantilize them. You can't treat them like children, right? When they say this target is stupid, instead of marking noncompliance, you go, I agree, delete target, right? You have to you have to get their buy-in as much as the parents, if not more so, because it's not just tricking them with a high P into doing an imitation target. They're doing work, and they have to feel safe and they have to feel heard. And so it makes a lot of ABA practitioners nervous because it's not textbook. You don't sit at the table for 5 minutes, then earn a 3-minute break, and then earn your token economy. It's really more cognitive, which is why I love ACT, because ACT lets you treat them like people and gives you the tools you need to still be doing ABA, to be scientific, to be behaviorist, to be taking data, to be doing assessments, but also to not treat them like small children, which is disrespectful and patronizing, and it teaches them that they aren't important, that their feelings aren't important, that they're not real people, that they're not young adults, that they're just always going to be treated like children, which is really, really bad for them, you know?
Yeah. And how did you learn about ACT? Because you said that first you like it ACT, and then like you already knew about ABA, of course, because of your brother. But the part that got you was ACT.
Oh yeah.
And usually it's the on the contrary.
Yeah, it's the other way around,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And so, well, the first time I ever learned about ACT was in my first master's program. I was taking psychology of terrorism, which is a fascinating subfield of psychology, as you can probably imagine. And I wrote my final paper in that class, almost 30 pages, on how ABA is used to treat terrorists, is used in the process of de-radicalization. I've since learned, now that I'm an adult, that I had a really rosy colored look on that situation, that it's not quite as positive as I had hoped it. Nothing about that process for anybody is a lot of fun, but I mean, the literature was there, right? There's a lot of people using behaviorism to treat a lot of criminal behavior. And I learned about ACT in that paper for the first time, in relational frame theory. Relational frame theory has been used also to treating is such a weird word, to engage with people who hold dangerous political ideas and to see if we can change their perspectives. So I first heard about it then, years and years ago. And then I've struggled with depression and anxiety most of my adult life, young adult, teenage years. And I actually got a copy of A Liberated Mind by Stephen Hayes
Mm-hmm.
from a friend for myself, not professionally, not about ABA, but for me as a person. And I fell in love with it. And I learned everything I could about ACT. I bought all the books and I was using it on myself, not as an intervention for clients, for me. So for first and foremost, for me, ACT is about the practitioner. ACT is a tool for us to use on ourselves so that we are more flexible and more adaptive for our clients so that we can heal ourselves, because we go around trying to fix everybody and we're all
Yeah.
scared, broken adults, right? So I had been doing ACT almost 2 years on myself. And I had a group of friends who we were all learning it together and engaging with it for ourselves and for each other before I even considered it ABA. And then when I really realized that this is something that we need to be pushing in traditional ABA spaces, I wanted the credential to be able to do that. And so that's when I decided to get my BCBA.
Wow. Super on the other side. I never heard anyone that had heard and studied ACT and then got to
And then
apply.
got into ABA. I know it never happens that way. But I had so much ABA knowledge. I think the reason that doesn't happen is because to really understand ACT and to do it really well, it takes a certain level of understanding of behaviorism,
Mhm.
right? Of positive and negative reinforcement, of extinction. And I already knew all of those things. I've known all those things since I was a kid. So
Yeah.
I had all the prerequisite knowledge needed, right? Now, I don't think you have to know those things to do ACT or to benefit from it, but it helps when you're studying it, right? And I already had all those things. So I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the science of it. I love relational frame theory. And I fell in love with what I thought it could do for ABA. It's this bridge between sit at the table and do your imitation targets and the more psychological cognitive behavior therapy, which I think has its place, but scientifically is not as effective as stronger forms of behavioral therapy because it's not behavioral, right?
Mhm.
There has to be a middle ground between the ridiculousness that is tabletop ABA and so how do you feel about that, right? There's this middle ground, and that's ACT. And ACT is going to save us. And I've said that since before I was even in ABA. I was like, ACT is going to save ABA because it makes ABA human, right? It's the magic wand that takes the robot and turns them back into a real boy. And we're seeing that as more ABA practitioners start getting into and understanding and studying ACT and relational frame theory. And then you see it also in the hesitancy and in the straight up aggression from other BCBAs who are like, this is nonsense. This is full of crap. This is awful. What are you talking
Not
about?
science.
Which is hilarious because there is more evidence, more peer reviewed published evidence for acceptance and commitment therapy than for most of ABA and most of our ABA interventions. Like there's what, 34, 35 papers on token economies. There's 3,600 peer-reviewed studies on acceptance and commitment therapy. That was as of like 2021. So there's more now. Thousands. It goes back to what is evidence? What do they consider to be evidence? What do they consider to be science? And that's all caught up in their own biases, their own education, right? And their own conditioning as to what they believe is science.
Yeah, I went to learn about ACT when I was looking for something in the middle on not having this strict ABA, on thinking about imitation 10 times, and something to also use it with teenagers and adults, because I was really against this idea that ABA is for children. So
Yeah.
if I see a science, I see a science. It's not a method. It's not a methodology. ABA has its methods, methodologies. Okay, but it's not a methodology.
Mhm.
So I was struggling on that. And I also suffer with anxiety and depression. So I take medicines for, I don't know, 6 years, something like that. And I also started seeing ACT for myself. So all these kinds of feelings and thoughts and living through my values, like it really helps you when you receive so much information and you don't know where to go, and then you sit still and think, okay, which are my values? So you feel less pressured and you know exactly where you need to go and the decisions that you need to make. And I saw you posting something on ACT is a lifestyle.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
not
lifestyle.
something you do, but it's something like you become, like you incorporate in the
Into
way that,
yourself.
yeah, in the way that you think, you relate to people. Uh, and we still like, imagine you working with some teenager and you were not being a compassionate human being, the damage that you would do to this teenager. And then when you put all of this in perspective, and we see so much violence in schools like we see a lot in the United States, it makes so much sense that we so need ACT on the teachers training,
And
therapists,
parents, on the
in
parents'
parents.
ideas and
Yes.
values and I mean, ACT is one of those, and when we talk about it, I don't know if you ever feel this way. I always feel like I'm like recruiting into a cult.
Yes.
I'm like, I know this sounds culty. I promise it's not.
But trust me, it is not.
Trust me, because it's like when we're scientists, we do science. I do a DRA, I do extinction, I do positive reinforcement. And then we're over here like, you become ACT. It becomes a part of you. I can understand why some people are like, what? People don't like to change. People don't like to grow. ACT requires openness, willingness, vulnerability. It requires self analyzing. It requires being able to look at yourself and see. But I don't know how we can expect to teach those skills to our learners if we refuse to do them ourselves. And what I think ACT does so beautifully is it provides the framework and the language for us to do it for us and for us to teach them to do it for them so that we're all better together. We're growing together, right? You're growing with your clients, with your parents, with your staff. You're not just laminating a token economy. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm not trying to pick on token economies, but it's just how many 13-year-olds are still earning 5 Buzz Lightyears for a 5-minute break? It's unacceptable. And we're not teaching them self-regulation. We're not teaching them true emotional identification. We hold up a picture of a sad person and they say sad. Okay, that's great when they're 3, but very few people go like when they're actually
Yeah,
sad.
yeah, yeah.
So we're not teaching them true emotional intelligence or being able to reflect or understand their own emotions. We're not teaching them emotional communication. We're not teaching them. We're just touch nose. It's just what are we doing? And so ACT is that bridge. It gives you those skills in a behavior analytic way, in a way that is rooted in behavioral science. And yet people are so hesitant to do it because it's work. Learning about it is work. The work it makes you do. I've had people literally message me on Instagram and say, I'm scared to learn about ACT because I know it's going to make me look at myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm scared about what I'm going to see. That happens a couple times a month. Someone will tell me that. And I'm like, well, then don't do it because I'm not going to like tell you to go do ACT with your kids if you're not going to do it, if you're not ready. But, it's a powerful, powerful tool. Now, it's also not everything. And it's not the
Mm-hmm.
first time these ideas, many of these ideas are indigenous. Many of these ideas are much, much older than Steve Hayes, right? But ACT is just our current language, our current behavior analytic language that we're using to convey these ideas and to talk about them and to publish on them. And, it's I always say it's so lucky that the answer to all of the world's problems happens to be in behavior analysis. How lucky, because we're all in behavior. I think ACT could save the world, but people are just stubborn.
Saying that you are doing a cult.
Yeah, I'm in a cult. I know, and it sounds so culty. I hate it. I really do. One of my first things I asked my ACT teachers, my mentors, was how do you talk about ACT without it sounding like a cult? Because every single time I'm like, so this is this amazing thing. It's this hexaflex. There's 6 processes, and you learn about yourself. You tie into your values, and you make value-based behavioral changes. And there's this matrix, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" Gotta work on my elevator pitch,
Yeah, this is so like the first thing on Act 101 would be how to talk about Act and not seem like a test or like
and not seem like a crazy person. I know, it's so funny. It's so funny. And I just start by saying this is going to sound weird.
Yeah, and then they already know what to expect.
And it's unfortunate too, because like in our current culture, there's so much pick up a book, self-help, 5 steps, right? Like there's this culture of self-help, right? Where people are already used to this language in a certain way. So when they hear it, they're like, red flag, right? Mm-hmm. It's really hard to discuss it in a way that doesn't seem crazy to people who don't already know a lot about ABA or behaviorism or cognitive behavioral therapy or anything. What I usually say, especially to parents of smaller children, is we're teaching them to identify what matters to them. And so when they make a behavior choice, it's not just tied to something, their iPad or food. It's tied to who they want to be as a person. And that will serve them, because eventually they're not going to care about the iPad anymore, right? We need to expand what they care about and why they're making the choices they're making. Because when you make a choice as an adult, most of the time, it's not because you're going to get immediate access to whatever it is that you want. It's because of who you are, of who you've decided you want to be. And teaching that as early as we can helps them, especially kids who are going to have a harder time, who are going to have a harder time with who they are, who are going to be treated poorly. Giving them that inner compass, right? Strengthening it, helping them find it and strengthen it. It protects them. It gives them a sense of safety and anchoring beyond tangible reinforcement.
And do you know something that I will probably hear from people for them to learn about ACT? They will say something that, and I want your thoughts on that. They think that since ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, some people call training, but when we go to therapy, they think that this is a psychotherapy. So if you were doing ACT, you were doing psychotherapy. And for us who we were not psychologists, convince them that this is not psychotherapy that you were doing when you were implementing ACT into your practice. So what could we do? What could we say to those who will even accuse us of doing?
Of being out of skill. Oh yeah, accusing is the word. So I have 3 things I usually say. One is that it can be psychotherapy. People can use ACT in a psychotherapeutic way. My psychiatrist is ACT trained, and she's a psychiatrist. And so she uses ACT on me in a psychotherapeutic way because she's trained as a psychiatrist. So you don't go up to your clients as a BCBA and say, we're going to dig deep. I want you to explain the trauma behind this response. That's not your job. ACT is a set of principles. ACT is an idea. ACT is a set of metaphors, really, right? Which can be applied in different ways. And if you are applying ACT that you can apply behaviorism psychoanalytically,
Yes.
right? So if you're applying it in a way that is out of scope, that's on you to understand what your scope is. The thing itself is not anything. It's not out of scope or in scope. I'd argue that ACT foundationally is within scope. And there's an amazing article by Jonathan Tarbox, is ACT within the scope of behavior analysts, in which he says yes, because it fits the 7 dimensions, which is its own podcast. Like, that's its own problem. But one, the idea of what is and isn't psychotherapy for most people is entirely crafted by media. They have no idea what psychotherapists actually do. And they have no idea the difference between different types of therapy. There is no one psychotherapy. There are Jungian and Freudian and CBT and DBT and ERT and all the letters you can think of in the world. Therapists are go anywhere from counselors to PhD level psychiatrists, right? We are trained to do what we're trained to do. And there is a way to do ACT that is completely within scope of what we do. And there's a way to do it that's out of scope, sure. But there's a way to do anything that's out of scope. But those lines, those hard lines of what scope is different for every person. And I think we focus a lot on, you're in a BCBA, you're not a psychologist, you can't do this, right? If I'm talking to a parent in parent training and they're telling me that they're scared because of this behavior is dangerous, and I engage with them about their fear and figure out where it comes from and see what we can do to make it better, am I a psychotherapist? Am I out of scope? Some would say yes. So I'm supposed to stand in front of this parent and go, per the ABC data, we must not do this. Goodbye. And walk away. These lines, these hard lines, were created by insurance companies. They were created by people saying, you can make money doing this, you can make money doing this, and you can make money doing this. You can't go over here because then you're making money doing something else. Right?
Yeah.
This is a different billing code. And my rule book says, in order to do this billing code, you have to have this degree and this kind of training. Now, scope is important because you can hurt people, right? It's not entirely fictional. But the line on where these things are and aren't has to be with the individual, right? I'm not going to not engage with my parents or with my students when they're talking about their feelings, because I'm sorry, I'm out of scope. I'm not a psychologist.
Red flag, red flag.
Like, what does that even mean? Now, if I see a problem, if they admit depression, suicidal ideation, self-harm, I'm going to refer to a psychiatrist, and we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to make a team to protect this child, because I am out of scope to treat that. I cannot treat it. But I think there's a very big difference between treating something and acknowledging something. I see so many BCBAs saying, I can't do that. I can't do that. I had a BCBA tell me once that she was seeing suicidal behavior in a client, but that she hasn't told the parents because it's out of scope.
Oh.
I'm like, telling the parents that their child is suicidal is out of scope? Well, I'm not trained to know what that means. Well, when they look at you and say they're going to kill themselves, I don't think anyone has to be trained to know what that means.
No.
Right? We have very rigid ideas in our head of what all these things mean. And scope is incredibly important. And I'm not saying it isn't. And I'm not saying that you should practice outside of your scope. But what your scope is and isn't, I think it mostly is defined by you and your personal ethics and experience. And when you go out of scope, don't freak out or leave the conversation or be rude or ruin a relationship. Ask for help. Right? I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I have since I was 17 years old. And what frustrates me more than anything is that BCBAs will say that they are out of scope with depression, they're out of scope with anxiety, they're out of scope with all of these things, that they can't do it. Yet they say they can treat OCD, which they absolutely cannot. 99% of them. ABA can be incredibly harmful for OCD, especially in children. And in our assessments, in the VB map, in the Vineland, in the AFLs, there's a section for compulsive behavior. How are we trained to measure that? We aren't trained to know the difference between compulsive and rigid behavior. And so we're out of scope significantly, and that can lead to significant damage, but no one ever thinks about it. It's just one more line on an assessment. So we have to be more flexible with ourselves on what our ideas of scope are, what our ideas of our own competency are, and recognize that there aren't these nice little lanes. I only do this, because people are all over the place. And when you have families and children and parents and staff, you're going to need to be flexible. Now, when you're out of scope for treatment, you get help, you seek help, you get other practitioners. But just acknowledging something, having a conversation, right? Building rapport, right? Engaging with parents, that's not out of scope. Don't make promises you can't keep, right? Don't promise something you can't do. Don't treat something you don't know what to do. But ACT is in scope for behavior analysts because it is behavior analysis. It's rooted entirely in behavior analysis. But if you go up to someone, you're like, we're going to diffuse from our ideas of self, and then we're going to do a trauma-based exercise. No. And you know you're not supposed to do that, and that's not how you're meant to apply it. I think people really like their little box, either being inside of it where they feel safe or putting it on somebody else. You're an ABA person, so you can't do this, because it makes everyone feel nice and comfortable. But that's not how human beings work, right? And I don't know about in Brazil, but here, most of the time, we're the only mental health professionals in that house. And the wait list for a psychiatrist, the wait list for a psychologist, the wait list for a talk therapist can be up to a year. So I'm supposed to discontinue services? No. I'm not going to practice outside of my scope. I'm not going to break any laws. I'm not going to do any harm, but I'm not going to pretend like this person isn't a person and doesn't have a wide array of issues. And I'm not going to not help just because I'm out of scope, whatever that means. I think it's just one of those things everybody has to figure out for themselves, what that means for them, and be able to admit when they need help, which I think is something that most of the time people have really, really struggled with.
Yeah. No, great points of reflection. And I think that, of course, it's more comfortable just to run your programs on verbal behavior and not going to this other side. But we have this population who needs services. So we need to prepare ourselves to get the training, get the knowledge that we need to help this population. Because like you said, like, here is more common to have a psychologist that also will be a behavior analyst, and maybe he or she will have like the both sizes of things, but it's not like that in the United States. So here I think that we have this good part on having more other professionals, but even them, they are pretty, I don't know, many psychologists who become behavior analysts, I think they forget that they are also a psychologist. They forget this part. I don't know how this happens. They completely, like, I say, oh my God, you did a 5-year bachelor's degree in psychology. You forgot everything that you learned there, that to care about people, because that's what I expect from a psychologist, someone compassionate. I don't know.
The skill sets are so different. And you're like, I find that with teachers who become BCBAs. I'm like, do you forget what it's like to be a teacher? Like, it's really hard, And so, because ABA is very comfortable. This is what you're allowed to do. This is what you do. That's all you do. And then you're done.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not good. I think it's become that. I don't think it was meant to be that, right? Where you come in and you do your verbal behavior and you do your trials and you leave. It's very
every
neat.
day the same thing.
It's very check off the boxes. And I think that that's part of the problem. People are very comfortable with their check off the box, follow the steps, task analysis, ABA. And people just don't work that way. Maybe very small children, which a lot of us work with, right? They kind of work that way. But once they're talking, once they're 4, 5, 6 years old, they're messy people, right? And so we have to be able to be more flexible and adaptive and nothing about how BCBAs become BCBAs makes them flexible or adaptive.
No,
right?
no, and how they are treated. Like if you are flexible, if you advocate for flexibility, and thinking outside the box, you can be seen as like not a good people, not a good person, because you are thinking outside the box. So you are questioning, you are having doubts, and many people they don't like that.
No.
So we will
ABA can be
always
very
upset.
comfortable. It can be very comfortable, and people don't like being uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not just ABA. Psychiatry here in the United States, you wait 8 months, you have a 4-hour appointment, they write a report where they just change the names, the reports are all the same, and they move on to the next. So psychiatry is having a huge problem here with similar problems, right? It's just comes down to the individual, what their
Yeah,
values are. And I think a lot of people don't know what their values are because they've never thought about it. You and I can give our full list of values, right? Because
yeah,
we've done
yeah,
that work. So, um, it's an interesting conundrum we're in the field, but I think I'm very, very, very proud and inspired by a lot of people in the field, right? On social media, in places of power, who are trying very hard to fix some of these problems. They're aware of them and they're working hard to fix them. It's just a really big problem, and big problems are hard to fix. So we just have to keep on the individual level, right? Having these conversations, doing the work as much as we can, and pushing because you know it's the right thing to do. It's the value aligned choice. So it will work out eventually. Even if there's consequences. But when you're making value-based choices, you're willing to accept the consequences.
Yeah,
Because you know you're in service of yourself. When you
yeah,
go to bed at night, you can sleep because you know that what you did was in service of who you are. And that's the power ACT gives you. And I think that that's a power everyone should be able to have, from our littlest kids to our PhDs, right? The ability to know I'm doing my best for myself in the ways that I think I should be and behave. And what else can you do?
yeah, definitely. Well, great talk. I want to let you go because I know that you were out all day long, and
Worked
you
all
have
day.
you have a big all day of meetings tomorrow probably, and
All
lots of
day.
works. But I'll definitely want to come back for a second round,
Yes.
to talk more about ACT, because the good thing is that we have some Stephen Hayes books in Portuguese.
In Portuguese, yes, I'm sure.
Yes,
Yes.
he's
So let's
like,
do a book club or something. Let's pick them
yeah,
apart. Let's do some
yeah,
presentations
yeah,
because we have the same book in both languages. So let's see what those
yeah.
are, and we can do something with
Yeah,
that.
I will tell you, it has one that it was with my husband, because his English is not so good, so he needs to read in Portuguese. So I gave to him. But we have some books of Stephen Hayes, so that's a good thing, a good topic. I have one here that I was, do you know those books of exercises?
Yeah. Mhm.
So I had one that I was doing with myself, so that it has in Portuguese, so many people can reach out. I am waiting my copy on the new book of uh, working on ACT inside, yes, inside your scope of practice. Yes,
This is
this
the book
one.
that I have right next to my bed because
Yeah, you are reading every day. I'm seeing. I'm seeing. So I'm waiting for my copy to arrive because we are not so close.
yeah, it takes a little. The shipping takes a little longer.
Geographic reasons.
Yes.
So I'm waiting on this book to arrive. So I will love to share. I will love to know your thoughts on this once I get in my hands. So we have a lot to cover, a lot to talk about. So I will definitely want you here more to talk
Yes.
more, because
Anytime.
we don't have lots of this content in Portuguese, and I am really happy to make it available and for free for everyone who wants to see it. So if you remember any resource, because we have Google Translator, so this
Yes.
could help lots of people on reading things in Portuguese, please send me, and I will make sure that will be on the description of this video.
Perfect.
So I just want to thank you so much for your time. You don't know, we never know how our job will impact others.
Yeah.
And we are so far away from each other, and Brazil is so big, and I am sure that maybe in 2 or 3 years this content will be on YouTube, and we will be doing other things, and someone will be listening, and this talk will be really important for someone else. So this
Thank you
really
for hosting and doing the work. You're doing the work. I just showed up and talked, which is my favorite thing to do. Anyway.
I love it. That like this is huge. Like when I hear this, someone DM me or send me any kind of message, I always say, I have a company, I need to pay my bills. I have a family. But it's so beyond the money, because I could be working on other things, but I chose to be
making more money.
Yes,
work.
even yes.
Absolutely.
But I'm choosing to be here and doing this job, and it's so beyond the money when I receive those kinds of messages that like someone is watching the content that I did 3 years ago. And I'm sure that this is the kind of content that we did here today that not many people are talking about, because they're afraid, because they have their own bias, and they feel hurt when they have this kind of content. I know how important it is, because I used to be on the other side, and once I find people who had the same thoughts, it was so good, alleviates, because it makes you feel that you were not alone.
Yes.
And many, they are giving up the field because they are feeling bullied, pressured. They are not feeling that they are valued. So I know how important it is. That's why I wanted to just tell you how important it is. So
I appreciate it so much. Anytime you let me know, I'll come back. We can talk about anything.
Please. And once when I in some opportunity that I will be in the United States, I really want to have a coffee with you in Atlanta. It's a beautiful
stay. Yes.
It's Georgia. It is a beautiful.
It's beautiful here.
Yes, I had done some road trip in Georgia.
I love it. It's beautiful here. You're welcome anytime. Bring the kids.
Definitely. I never travel without them. We are packaged. You
I'm gonna be the same.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be the same.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.